Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence will come to order. Good morning. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from expert witnesses in the security realm that will educate our efforts to mitigate threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party to the U.S. homeland. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Well, good morning. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for testifying today, bringing your expertise to this committee and informing members of Congress about the threats that we're currently facing. Despite years of attempts by the United States to develop a productive, fair, and honest relationship with the People's Republic of China, America has been met with dishonesty and aggression. The PRC government run by the Chinese Communist Party has deceived and manipulated us at every turn, committing espionage in our homeland and working to overturn the global rules-based order. The U.S. is now locked in a peer competition with the CCP, in which the Chinese government is seeking to place itself at the top of the global world order while degrading America's power militarily, diplomatically, and economically. In recent months, events have shown us that the CCP has escalated this competition. On January 28th, a Chinese surveillance balloon entered U.S. airspace and spent the next 8 days traveling over the majority of the continental United States. And while we do not know yet what kind of information the Chinese surveillance balloon was able to collect, we can be certain that the CCP's intention was to exploit sensitive sites, including military sites and critical infrastructure across our country. This Chinese surveillance balloon was a brazen display of espionage in the U.S. homeland, but it's ultimately one of the many ways that the CCP is working to exploit our vulnerabilities. Today, we must take the conversation beyond that balloon and discuss all avenues the CCP is threatening U.S. homeland security in. Through the CCP's aggressive national strategy of military-civil fusion, which aims to establish the People's Liberation Army as the dominant global military force by 2049, the Chinese government is stealing information from U.S. military and civilian targets. A majority of the threats China poses to the U.S. homeland security are occurring below the threshold of traditional conflict. We need to be cognizant of these threats and generate multifaceted solutions to deter them. These threats are already directly affecting American citizens. MD Anderson Cancer Center, for instance, one of the nation's top hospitals for cancer in my home state of Texas, ousted several scientists from the center in 2019 who had ties to the CCP. The scientists were flagged by the U.S. National Institute of Health regarding a variety of threats, including data security, intellectual property loss, and they were ultimately investigated by the FBI. This incident was by no means unique, with the CCP consistently targeting American research and innovation across the country. Additionally, the CCP is exploiting the open nature of American academia to steal vital research and development. Confucius Institutes, marketed as mechanisms to promote Chinese language and culture, have used the CCP to recruit American talent to support military-civil fusion, monitor Chinese nationals who are studying at American universities, and have faced allegations of visa fraud. In recent years, the U.S. government has worked to close most of these Confucius Institutes. However, the CCP has made efforts to change the institutes' names or obfuscate their influence on American universities. Today, as a matter of fact, I am reintroducing with Chairman Green and Congressman Brad Winstrup the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institutes and Chinese Entities of Concern Act, which passed out of this committee with bipartisan support last Congress. This bill works to close Confucius Institutes and any other programs with the same goal operating in the U.S. It also holds American universities accountable and ensures they prioritize their students' education and right to free speech above partnerships with Confucius Institutes that require universities to censor curriculums in favor of CCP ideology. I appreciate the support of Chairman Green, Congressman Winstrup, and look forward to a bipartisan discussion on this. In addition to threats to American IP and academic freedom, the CCP is targeting U.S. cybersecurity and critical infrastructure and undermining our economic security. Moreover, illicit fentanyl analogs, and related precursor chemicals are predominantly sourced from the PRC and then sent to Mexico. These poisonous drugs continue to fuel the tragic fentanyl crisis in our homeland. I am eager to discuss these challenges and more during today's hearing. Let me be clear about this hearing. To anyone who's listening at home or abroad, this conflict and the discussion today doesn't have anything to do with the Chinese people who are living in China and being manipulated by the CCP. This conflict is with the CCP. It's an authoritarian regime that commits genocide against its own people. They censor free speech, not just in China, but across the globe, and they aim to end democracy as we know it. This hearing is the first of many, but it's a first step on this subcommittee and the Greater Committee on Homeland Security, which we intend to confront the threats stemming from CCP influence that target our homeland. We will meet CCP aggression with strength, its deception with unflinching truth, and its attempts at exploitation with justice. We look forward to a bipartisan cooperation in this Congress as we all seek effective solutions to combat pervasive threats posed by the CCP to our homeland security. I now recognize the ranking member, my friend from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for his opening statement.
Good morning. I want to thank Chairman Pfluger for calling this important hearing and thank our witnesses for coming today. I especially want to thank Dr. Tyler Jost from Brown University in Rhode Island for joining us, along with our other expert witnesses. It is an honor to serve as ranking member of this subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and all members of the subcommittee on a bipartisan basis to protect Americans from those who seek to threaten the security of the homeland. Make no mistake, China is the competitor with the greatest combination of intent and capacity to threaten U.S. global leadership. President Xi himself stated last year that by 2049, he wants to ensure that China and the CCP lead the world in terms of composite national strength and international influence. This is concerning for all of us who believe deeply that democracy and human rights must be advanced and protected here in our own country and across the world. Just last year, FBI Director Christopher Wray sat before this committee in this very room and warned that the greatest long-term threat to our nation's information and intellectual property and our economic vitality is the counterintelligence and economic espionage threat from China. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has warned that the Chinese Communist Party is accelerating their efforts to fuse economic and technology policies with their military ambitions in ways that are forcing us, compelling us, to defend United States businesses and workers. We have already seen the Chinese Communist Party threaten the safety and privacy of American citizens through economic espionage and theft of U.S. intellectual property, the theft of personal data of American citizens through cyber attacks, the recent use of a spy balloon and other methods of surveillance to illegally gather intelligence on American territory, and the buildup of military capabilities that seek to eclipse the United States and our democratic allies. We must recognize that the threat posed by the CCP and take immediate action to best position the U.S. to confront China's attempts to undermine our national security. Today's hearing is an important opportunity for members of this subcommittee to demonstrate that we are united in a bipartisan effort to defend the privacy and safety of the American people, to protect U.S. industries and supply chains, and enhance national security, all while remembering that one of the most important ways to counter the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions is to build an economy here at home that works for working people, so we can show the world that our American system of democracy and freedom is more effective in lifting people up than the CCP model of autocracy and repression. Democrats are committed to doing this work with our Republican colleagues in a spirit of collaboration. Last year, thanks to the leadership of President Biden, Congress passed the Bipartisan CHIPS Act to invest $280 billion into domestic semiconductor production that will enhance our national security, strengthen U.S. industry, create jobs, reduce inflation, and improve our competitiveness with China. The CIA has recently launched a dedicated China Mission Center, and the State Department has launched a new Office of China Coordination in order to strengthen the U.S. diplomatic, military, and intelligence capabilities in meeting CCP threats. It is my hope that today's hearing will further illuminate the CCP's strategies to undermine our democracy, our economy, and way of life, and how Congress can work together to meet these challenges. As we do this work together, we must remember that the people of China and people of Chinese origin experience oppression and human rights violations at the hands of the authoritarian Chinese Communist Party, and anti-Asian harassment and discrimination is too prevalent globally and here at home. So I also want to be abundantly clear. that we do not condone any anti-Chinese or anti-Asian bigotry, and we must condemn any acts of anti-Asian discrimination in the strongest possible terms. Our struggle is not with the Chinese people, but rather with the Chinese Communist Party that is increasingly hostile to democracy and human rights. The CCP wants nothing more than to see Americans become divided and prejudiced, but they will be disappointed. Instead, we will outcompete the CCP by ensuring that America remains a beacon of freedom to the world and by continuing to provide safe harbor to those fleeing oppression and violence. That is how we will strengthen our nation and our economy. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I am pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. And I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. I'd like to now formally introduce our witnesses. The Honorable William Evanina dedicated his life for 32 years to government service. And in May of 2020, the Senate confirmed him as the very first director of National Counterintelligence and Security Center. In this position, Mr. Evanina was the head of counterintelligence for the entirety of the U.S. government. And his background in counterintelligence lends itself well today to our specific discussion, which will focus heavily on the ways of CCP espionage efforts and how they impact our homeland, including the theft of U.S. IP, the exploitation of academic research, and much more. Lieutenant General Joseph T. Guastella joins us from Mitchell Institute, also a friend of mine in a former life as a fighter pilot, and he is a senior fellow at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Lieutenant General Guastella is a command pilot who most recently served as Deputy Chief of Staff of Operations at U.S. Air Force Headquarters. It was his job to oversee air power capabilities, including the Homeland Defense Mission of North American Aerospace Defense, or NORAD, and NORTHCOM. With the foundation of his impressive background, Lieutenant General Guastella will be able to speak to America's evolving homeland security needs as it faces a challenge never seen before by the CCP. And given the recent shocking events, which I think were a wake-up call of the surveillance balloon, we're grateful for your service, General, and for being here today. The Honorable Carrie Bingen joins us from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, where she is the Director of Aerospace Security Project. Prior to this, she served as Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. Her strong background in Homeland Security and defense policies will be an exceptional addition as we discuss the growing and changing threat landscape, including threats to American critical infrastructure as it pertains to the U.S. peer competition with China. I'd now like to once again recognize the ranking member, gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for a brief introduction of the next witness.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to welcome our fourth witness, Dr. Tyler Jost. Dr. Jost is an assistant professor of political science and international and public affairs at Brown University in the great state of Rhode Island. He is also the Watson Institute Assistant Professor of China Studies and devotes his time and effort to improving our understanding of national security decision-making in the People's Republic of China. Professor Jost also previously served as a military intelligence officer with assignments in Afghanistan, U.S. Cyber Command, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to all the witnesses for taking time here. I now recognize the Honorable William Evanina for an opening statement. We do have a timer, and we'll keep them to 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, members of the subcommittee, it's an honor to be here with you today to discuss this really important topic. I spent 32 years of my career working for the U.S. government, in the FBI, the CIA, as the chairman referenced, as the first Senate-confirmed director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. But I'm here before you today as the CEO of the Evanina Group, where I provide consulting services to boards of directors, CEOs, and executives on this exact threat we discussed today. Today's topic, China and the threat to the homeland, is an existential threat. It's the most complex, pernicious, aggressive, strategic threat our nation has ever faced. I proffer to this subcommittee that the U.S. private sector and academia have become the geopolitical battle space for China. Xi Jinping has one goal: to be the geopolitical, military, and economic leader of the world, period. Along with the Ministry of State Security, the People's Liberation Army, and the United Front Work Department, they drive a comprehensive whole-of-country approach to their efforts to invest, leverage, infiltrate, influence, and steal from every corner of the United States. This is a generational battle for Xi, and it drives their every decision. We must approach this threat from the Communist Party of China with the same sense of urgency, spending, and strategy we have done for the past 2 decades to combat terrorism. I would offer to this subcommittee that we are in a terrorism event, a slow, methodical, strategic, persistent, and enduring event which requires, in response, a degree of urgency of action. Let me be more specific. The Communist Party of China's capabilities and intent are second to none as an adversary. The cyber breaches, insider threats, surveillance and penetrations into our critical infrastructure, of which 85% is owned by the private sector, have all been widely reported. There's much more in the classified realm, but we've become numb to it as a nation. Additionally, it's estimated that 80% of American adults have had all of their private data stolen by the Communist Party of China. The other 20%, just most of it. Layering in the Communist Party of China's crippling stranglehold on many aspects of our supply chain, and what results is a daunting vulnerability and susceptibility of unacceptable proportions. When we layer in the current threat landscape, sophisticated surveillance balloons, maritime port surveillance, strategic land purchases by military bases, terrestrial and space-based 5G threats, US-based Chinese police stations, Huawei, and TikTok, the collage begins to paint a very bleak mosaic. From a cybersecurity perspective, China possesses persistent and unending resources to penetrate our systems and exfiltrate our data, or sit dormant and wait or plant malware on critical infrastructure for future hostilities. At the same time, the insider threat epidemic originating from the Communist Party of China has been nothing short of devastating to the U.S. corporate world. Additionally, the Communist Party of China strategically conducts malign influence campaigns at the state and local level with precision. This effort must be exposed and mitigated. So why does it all matter? Economic security is national security. Our economic global supremacy, stability, and long-term vitality is at risk. It's squarely in the crosshairs of Xi Jinping and the communist regime. In 2020, the estimated economic loss from theft of intellectual property and trade secrets just from the Communist Party of China, just from what we know in prosecutions, is between $300 billion and $500 billion per year. That equates to about $4,000 to $6,000 per year for an American family of 4 after taxes. The cost is real. So how do we mitigate these threats? We must create a robust public-private partnership with real intelligence sharing, while at the same time staying true to our core values, morals, and rule of law, which made America the greatest country the world has ever seen. This will take a whole-nation approach. It will take time, and such approach must start with contextual awareness campaigns reaching a broad audience from every level of government to chambers of commerces to university campuses and from the boardrooms to the business schools, because the why matters. U.S. boards of directors and investment leaders must begin to look beyond the next fiscal quarter earnings and begin to think strategically about how their investment decisions and awareness of the long-term threat can impact not only their business model, but the economic and national interest of the United States. In conclusion, I investigated terror attacks after September 11th and led counterintelligence programs for the FBI. I would suggest the threat posed by China is much more dangerous to the longevity and sustainability of our nation than any terrorist threat actor. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evanina. And I now recognize General Gostella for his opening statement.
Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. As an individual who spent over 3 decades in service to our nation, I am also deeply concerned about the threats the Chinese Communist Party drives towards the U.S. homeland, especially in the military swim lane. And that's why events like this today are so important. On my last assignment on active duty, I was the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations for the United States Air Force. Our job was to organize, train, and equip forces, air forces, and then present those forces to the combatant commanders around the world. That includes NORAD Northcom, the command in charge of Homeland Defense. I also developed a very good understanding of the threats that China poses to the United States and the capabilities they use to achieve those objectives. I'd first like to highlight begin describing the threat that China poses to the United States and its allies. So in 1991, when the U.S. was celebrating the end of the Cold War, and we also were celebrating victory in Operation Desert Storm, China went to school on us. They took note, and they started a very concerted and deliberate effort to modernize their military capabilities. And here we are, 3 decades later, and they have largely met that mark. And they even seek further progress. That's why this year they saw even a significant increase in their defense spending. Their military now enjoys leading-edge capabilities that include long-range precision strike, hypersonic weapons, advanced integrated air and defense weapons, stealthy aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, and electronic warfare. And several of those systems have the range to hold the U.S. homeland at risk. And so the Chinese spy balloon, as was mentioned before, which garnered significant attention this past February, is a very loud wake-up call regarding the CCP's global ambition. Unfortunately, the U.S. is stretched thin when it comes to the capabilities and the capacity required to defend our homeland in the air domain, air and space domain. NORAD was originally designed to detect and defend North America from a catastrophic attack from the Soviet Union, later Russia. An additional role was added on after 9/11 to intercept, identify, and redirect unidentified aircraft that are approaching restricted areas. So the NORAD radars were optimized and tuned to detect aircraft that met those criteria. So balloons, until recently, generally did not fit in that category. But as threats evolve, including balloons, stealth aircraft, UASs, unmanned aerial systems, cruise missiles, so must our detection and defense enterprise. This will require that we modernize current radars and install new sensors in emerging zones of vulnerability, not just over the nation, but well outside our sovereign territory so we can get a heads up that they're coming. We must invest resources in the NORAD mission. That command gets its aircraft from the U.S. Air Force, but the Air Force today is the oldest and the smallest it's ever been in history. We're still flying B-52s that are 60 years old, tankers that are over 50 years old, fighters over 30 years old. Even the famed F-22, the best air-to-air fighter ever made, first flew in 1997. The Homeland Defense, however, doesn't start here in the homeland. Homeland Defense starts abroad with the combatant commanders that have the forces that are capable of an offensive punch against our adversary countries that deters them from attacking us. That's where it begins. The Air Force has to be modernized in the numbers necessary to meet the demands of the National Defense Strategy, as well as to deter threats against our homeland. More specifically, consider the Air Force's fighter inventory is too small to meet real-world demands. It's a major security concern, for while other services possess fighters, the Air Force is specifically tasked with homeland security, the air sovereignty mission. The Air National Guard is the entity within the Air Force that bears the preponderance of homeland defense. And their mission is particularly hard hit by the gap between old aircraft that are aging out of the inventory and a lack of new aircraft arriving to backfill those spots on the ramp. So Homeland Defense also requires investment in modernization and command and control, resiliency, ground and space-based sensors, data fusion, air refueling capabilities. Homeland Defense is our highest priority mission. We need to start treating it that way. And one war story, to share with the group here. On January 8th, 2020, 11 Iranian ballistic missiles hit a U.S. base at Al-Assad in Iraq. I was the coalition forces air component commander at that time. We possessed the intelligence about the attack that was going to happen. We were able to detect the missiles at launch. We were able to track the trajectory. But when it came to shooting them down, to defeating the missiles, we lacked any options. Why? Because we did not have the capacity, the defensive capacity, due to the other global commitments that our force was spread across. American service members had to ride out that attack and hope for the best. It was an appalling set of circumstances. Let's think what could happen against our homeland with threats like that. Adversaries like China understand these vulnerabilities. The United States is gradually waking up to this reality, but leaders have yet to seriously address the shortfall. We're still in a problem admiring phase, not in a solution implementation phase. And that's to change. So we have the bravest men and women in uniform, but we owe it to them to ensure they're prepared for the mission we ask them to execute. We owe it to our American citizens to ensure they're protected from attack. America's homeland is no longer a sanctuary against threats like China. We must recognize this new reality and aggressively close critical gaps in capacity and capability in the air domain. Thank you for allowing us to focus on this topic today, and I look forward